Welcome to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council with hosts Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Stay informed on the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. Get the facts, stand for truth. Hello and welcome back to the Family Beacon podcast. My name is Grace Evans and I am here with Moses Brattrud. Today we have quite a few things to cover, and we're going to start by talking about the Disrespect for Marriage Act, which unfortunately passed with Republican support. So we'll be talking about that. We'll also be discussing a new story that has come out, a heartbreaking story about Chloe Cole, who unfortunately was transitioned as a minor in the state of California, and now she's actually suing. She's suing a few doctors that pushed this transitioning upon her and didn't tell her the alternative options. We'll also be discussing our giving challenge here at Minnesota Family Council. So let's go ahead and just dive right on into what has been in the news recently, really just making the headlines on Twitter, Facebook, everywhere, which is the Disrespect for Marriage Act. First of all, tell us what it's really called and why we're calling it the Disrespect for Marriage Act.
Yeah, so it's called the Respect for Marriage Act. It's been getting a lot of coverage. We've talked about it here, and I won't recap everything that we've talked about with this bill. Essentially, it's just putting in statute what the Obergefell decision did in 2015, which said gay marriage is the law of the land. But it doesn't just do that, unfortunately. Basically, it takes preemptive action against any, for example, red state that might want to define marriage in a certain way. For example, if Obergefell were to somehow be overturned by a future Supreme Court and a state wanted to define marriage as being one man and one woman, this bill would stand in the way. Additionally, it possibly makes it, and I'm not the only one saying this here, it makes it very possible that different types of marriage that are different types of marriage, different farcical relationships that could be called a marriage, could be recognized by a state government, and then they would have to be then recognized by the federal government. So let me give you an example. And this is, again, this is a bill that in the U.S. Senate, to get Republican support, the authors of the bill tried to make it, quote unquote, more friendly to religious freedom. So Al Mohler, the Baptist theologian and commentator, he had something to say which I thought was really helpful. So I'll just read what he said. This was published a few days ago. The amended language includes vague assurances that the legislation will not violate religious freedom, but it mostly assures us that the bill will not do what no one claimed it would do, such as require congregations and churches to solemnize same-sex marriages. What is left wide open is the threat to ministries such as Christian orphanages and children's care, as well as adoption ministries and foster care. This amended language resolves nothing, but is offered as an assurance that religious freedom is protected. By the way, the language of the bill does not offer any absolute protection against polygamy if a state legalizes it in some form. And so we actually talked about that, like what if Utah were to legalize polygamy? What if New York were to legalize marrying a Chihuahua? Would that be something that the federal government and all the rest of the states would have to recognize? I think that's an open question now with the passage of this bill. I will say that the bill was passed in the Senate was slightly different than what was passed in the House with the SOP to religious freedom. So it will now have to be passed by the House again before it hits the president's desk.
Wow.
And there's a potential silver lining here. In all likelihood, this bill, unfortunately, will go to the president's desk. But this might be one of the last bad bills on social issues that hits President Biden's desk, at least before the 2024 election.
Let's pray it's the last bad one that hits the desk.
Let's pray, indeed.
Yeah, and let's pray that we get President Biden out of office.
And we can pray for that, not out of some partisan political calculus, but because we want our country to repent and turn from its wicked ways and elect leaders who will elect leaders who will stand for life and for the things that are close to God's heart, like families. So so the news there, the reason why that won't be hitting, we can expect that fewer bad bills will be hitting President Biden's desk is that because Republicans have officially retaken the U.S. House. So that they're going to have a somewhat narrow majority. And now we saw that many, many Republicans, unfortunately, voted with Democrats on this exact bill.
Right, which doesn't surprise me because we've seen Republicans be squishy on
We've
many
seen
things.
Republicans be squishy. But we hope that they'll have more backbone when they're in the majority, because that will give them more control over which bills come up for a vote.
True.
So we'll see what happens. We hope that they will not disappoint us. So we don't have a pro-marriage majority in the U.S. House right now, even with the recent wins. However, we will have a pro-life majority. That seems very clear. So we'll have a better chance at stopping bad bills in the next 2 years than we have in the last 2 years. So I'll say my final word on this, on the Respect for Marriage Act, which we call the Disrespect for Marriage Act because of the ways that it just tears into pieces God's design for marriage. There will be bitter fruit for our country for this rejection of what true marriage is, what true marriage means, the fruitful union of one man and one woman, the flourishing of their children. And I think we'll continue to see the decline of marriage rates, the decline of fertility rates, the disintegration of family as a building block of society, and the attack on our most fundamental freedoms, the free exercise of religion, the free exercise of our consciences. So that's what ultimately this bill signifies, and that's why we've been so loud about this. And I want to say thank you, by the way, to the many people who wrote into our senators. We had a higher response this time around than the last time we sent out the alert. And so people are really tuned into this issue, and that's really good to see. So we'll live to fight another day, and we're really grateful for your support. Now, I want to turn to something that Grace has been following, because the more personal, we can stay at 10,000 feet, or we can get down into the personal stories of people who are affected by, broadly speaking, the culture war, by the cultural contagion of transgender identification. So tell us what you've learned.
Yeah, I honestly was brought to tears by Chloe's story. Chloe Cole she is an 18-year-old advocate for the rights of children who struggle with gender dysphoria, and she's actually filing a lawsuit against a California-based healthcare company for, quote, breaching the standard of care when it recommended and performed puberty-blocking drugs, hormone therapy, and surgical transition procedures on her as a minor. So they medically transitioned her into a male as a minor. And I want to share her testimony because she testified in California. This was actually in July, and she just announced that she was suing them this week. But I really want to share her testimony because it brought me to tears. She says that I am the canary in the coal mine. Like, listen to my voice. My story is one of many. In other words, like, if you don't see me as a warning sign, and you don't act on that, then what is our country coming to? And it's heartbreaking. So let's just go ahead and roll about that 2-minute testimony that Chloe shared in California.
My name is Chloe Cole. I'm 18, and my story is not hyperbole. Starting around the age of 12, I began to believe that I was transgender. This belief was not organic. All the media I consumed as a kid showed me how stupid and vulnerable being a girl was. All the sexualized images of women gave me an unrealistic expectation of womanhood. I spent a lot of time online and quickly saw all the praise coming out of trans God on Instagram and other social media. I was a bit awkward in school and had some trouble making friends. Like many dysphoric children, I also suffer from a variety of mental health conditions, so I easily fell prey to the narrative that if I felt different and did not want to be a highly sexualized girl, I must be a boy. I obsessed over becoming a boy. I believed that all my insecurities and anxiety would magically disappear once I transitioned. The mental health professionals did not try to dissuade me of this delusional belief. I was fast-tracked into medical transition after I was diagnosed with dysphoria. In California, a child can pick their gender identity, and a care provider questioning that would be considered conversion therapy. This wasn't a misdiagnosis. It was mistreatment. My parents were told that the options were transition or suicide. They complied because they were not offered any other treatment solution for my distress. My distraught parents wanted me alive, so they listened to my doctors. I was placed on puberty blockers and testosterone after expressing my gender dysphoria to my therapist. and I was approved for a double mastectomy all by the age of 15. No one explored why I did not want to be a girl. More and more kids are falling for the false promise of happiness if they transition. Gender clinics in the US are turning a blind eye to European countries who are pumping the brakes on this experiment on youth. Who here really believes that, as a 15-year-old, I should have had my healthy breast removed, or that it should have been an option? When the CDPH got less than 300 reports of people getting hospitalized as a result of vaping. San Francisco banned vape products that same year. So I know that you care about the health of children, yet you are allowing doctors all over the state to remove the healthy breasts of children. How many more children's bodies will be destroyed before you actually listen? What is the sweet spot? 100? 200? 1,000? SB 107 will open the floodgates for confused children like me to get the gender interventions that many so regret. I am the canary in the coal mine.
So, wow, that testimony, it just puts everything into perspective, Moses, of these are real people, real children that are being impacted by this, and Chloe's story is just one of many. So I think it's really incredible that she is brave enough to come out and to testify, because of course so many people are going to say, oh, she's a hater and all these nasty, terrible things about her. But I mean, the bottom line is that she is absolutely right. I mean, as a 15-year-old, she had her healthy breasts removed, as she shared in that testimony. And now she can't nurse her own child. She might not even be able to have her own child in the future, as she shared in her testimony. And that really is actually hurting children. That is child abuse, I would argue. Mm-hmm. I mean, why would you chop off healthy organs? She shared otherwise that she's lost vital organs, healthy organs, because of the manipulation of the industry that wants to make money off of vulnerable children. And so I want to break down exactly how she's suing them, because of course, this is legal in California, unfortunately. So how is she going to sue this corporation? Well, she's going to sue against 3 specific doctors in the Kaiser Foundation Health Plan and the Permanent Medical Group. And this is why she's suing it. She's suing them for performing, supervising, and or advising transgender hormone therapy and surgical intervention for her when she was between 13 to 17 years old, which she is arguing constitutes a breach of standard care. Now, the reason that she's arguing this and her lawyers are helping her with this is because her parents were told that she would commit suicide if she didn't undergo this. She was told that. And there was no investigation into why she was feeling uncomfortable with her own body. Mm-hmm. You sent me a Twitter thread this week, I think, Moses, talking about this very topic, just of it's very common in our society for girls that are going through puberty, and we talked about this last week, to feel uncomfortable with their own body. It's very common. Almost every girl goes through this. And unfortunately, what is happening to these young girls like Chloe is they go to the doctor and they say, I'm feeling really uncomfortable in my own body. And the doctors say, wow, well, if we don't transition you into a male, then you're going to kill yourself. And the parents hear that and they think, oh, what? Like, we want to choose life for our child. And the kid goes, wow, yeah, I don't really want to be a girl right now because I'm really uncomfortable. And then they undergo this irreversible damage. And then they're scarred for life, physically and mentally. And so Chloe has shared that she has deep emotional wounds, severe regrets, and distrust for the medical system, and that she suffered physically, socially, neurologically, and psychologically. And so, yes, these medical professionals, quote unquote, falsely informed Chloe and her parents that the gender dysphoria would not resolve unless she went through with this transitioning. Right. And they completely...
The emotional blackmail.
Mm-hmm, and they completely ignored all of the studies that have come out showing how it's actually really hurtful to children, and how most transitioners that transition when they're minors actually regret it when they're older. They didn't share that information. They gave that ultimatum to her parents saying, would you rather have a dead daughter or a live son? And I mean, imagine hearing that as a parent, right, and not ever hearing these tragic stories and thinking, wow, of course I want a live child. I mean, it preys on the emotions. And so it is tragic because the vast majority of childhood gender dysphoria cases resolve by the time that the child reaches adulthood, if the child does not transition. So, like, doing something that will cause irreversible damage to a minor child because you want to make some money is so horrible, because that child is actually very likely going to grow up and to love the biological body that he or she was born in and not want to have vital organs taken away from them. And so the lawsuit concludes that the defendants intentionally obscured these facts. So the medical professionals deliberately obscured all these facts that we've been talking about and defrauded Chloe and her parents in order to perform a lucrative transgender medical experiment, which is so true. And I think that language is key. It is an experiment on America's children. This is just one story of many. And she shares, not in the testimony in that we just watched, but in another testimony, she says that it's a medical malpractice case, and I want to hold the adults who put me in harm's way accountable. What happened to me is horrible, but it didn't only happen to me. That's the worst part. It's happening to children all over the U.S. It's spreading all over the world, and I want to be able to create a precedent for people who have been in my situation to find justice, which I think that is really cool, that even in the midst of this terrible thing, she's able to stand up and say, I am fighting for the rights of other children. I am fighting for parental rights. I want children to be protected in my country. Again, she's the canary in the coal mine, right? As she said, which is a very touching statement. And meanwhile, I just want to point out the New York Times actually published a piece on Monday acknowledging the concerns that are growing about the long-term physical effects of transitioning, especially for minors. And so, that's interesting because major news outlets they've been very hesitant to talk about any of these things. They published a piece last week. We were on the podcast talking about that, and they briefly alluded to that, but it's becoming more and more popular for them to admit. The Times admitted that there is an emerging evidence of potential harm from using blockers, according to reviews of scientific papers and interviews with more than 50 doctors and academic experts around the world. More than 50 doctors that are standing up, and they are I'm sure they're afraid of getting blackmailed, of getting blacklisted, of getting called a hater, but they're realizing that this is actually really harmful. Like, Chloe began transitioning at 13. That is so young. And she changed her mind years later. And again, she probably won't be able to carry a child at full term. She has increased risks for certain cancers, especially cervical cancer. And again, she can't breastfeed her children in the future, which that she said was actually one of the biggest things that led her to realize that she was going down the wrong path and she shouldn't have taken that path.
You know, I read that New York Times article. I thought it was so interesting. They actually quoted a specialist from Mayo Clinic here in Minnesota. And he just said, I think he was a specialist in bone development, and he said something like, there's going to be a cost. Yeah. And these, conservatives have been saying this for years, since the whole idea of youth transition started to become normalized with Jazz Jennings, who we talked about last week, and a few other cases, this idea that not just adults doing whatever they want with their bodies, but children need to be able to do this with their bodies, or they will commit suicide. And the thing with children's bodies, of course, is that they're still developing. And when you it just makes me think of a friend of mine when I was in grade school, and he was a healthy kid. This is not a sad story. But when he was very young, he had to have heart surgery, and as a baby. And so then, when we were like going to the pool or something, you would see that he had a scar all the way down his chest because what is just relatively a tiny incision when you're a baby, as you grow, becomes this huge scar. I don't think that I hope he didn't have any huge permanent health effects. Actually, now that I think about it, there's some things that he needed to be careful about because of that condition. But now, just think that was something that needed to take place, and medical intervention that was needed, and he still may have some, hopefully minor, lifelong results from that. Now, what if you take something that is dangerous, that is unproven in terms of its effectiveness for children, and certainly in terms of its safety, and you're giving that to children, like the puberty-blocking drugs, like giving a healthy girl testosterone, which is known, like, even when healthy adult men take that, and it's the male hormone, there can be serious side effects, baldness, heart disease, etc. So it's just so shocking. And the New York Times, credit where credit is due.
I know.
They're speaking out about this. They should have done it years ago. But when many people in the mainstream media are not willing to question the transgender orthodoxy. The New York Times is willing to publish this piece, and this is not just their editorial board. This is the investigative journalists at the paper doing this, talking to 50 experts, and Grace is right to talk about the courage of those experts in coming forward. And the sad thing is now I'm wondering how many media outlets will still be too scared to report on the truth about this. They'll be scared of the transgender lobby because presumably organizations like GLAAD and Human Rights Watch and all of these vigorously pro-transgender children groups are going to be attacking the New York Times. So it'll be the prestige and the power, the cultural power of the New York Times versus the cultural power of the LGBT lobby.
And what's really hard is that this whole mindset has just been promoted by the media for so long. It'll take so long to overturn is what I'm trying to say, because we've seen, our culture has seen gender dysphoria as a normal sign to be encouraged and like even celebrated, I would say. Whereas we know it is an illness to be treated. It is not something you encourage. It is not something you protect, promote, or celebrate. It is a sign that something is severely wrong with someone, probably mentally, and they need compassion, they need support, but they do not need to be affirmed in that illness. We do not need to tell them, that's right, you were born in the wrong body. That's right, your body is ugly. No, we don't tell them that because that's not the truth and that's not loving. And so as I was just thinking more about this story, the bottom line I kept thinking about was the fact that we in our culture try to protect children, so we take away certain choices that they should never have in the first place. So minors, they're not allowed to sign contracts. They're not allowed to drink alcohol. They're not allowed to join the military unless it's like a very, very specific time, like unless we really need it. But they're not allowed to join the military right now because we're not at war, right? And so there's so many other things that kids are not allowed to do until they're 18, until they're 21. Why? Because children deserve to be protected, and our brains do not fully develop until we're in our mid-20s. And so we shouldn't be making decisions that are going to forever alter our lives or our bodies until we're old enough. And that's why we have parents. That's why we have these laws of you're not allowed to do things until you're a certain age. And so if we're not allowed to make decisions about, literally we're not allowed to vote till we're 18. We're not allowed to weigh into our country until we're 18. Why? Because we're young, we're minors, we're children. Why should we be making decisions about our own bodies that can cause us to get rid of very healthy organs, to cause irreversible damage, never be able to have children, even though we could have? It's horrifying. And so I just think that, I'm very, very proud of Chloe Cole, and I would just encourage everyone to continue following this story, to continue following what the news outlets do, because, Greta and the New York Times for reporting on this, but we really, to turn our culture around, to, again, switch that conception that this is something to be celebrated versus something that we should actually help but not affirm, be compassionate but not affirm. We need to all work together. News outlets, families, and we need to be having these conversations with our children because they're definitely being exposed to this. I mean, if they're online, Chloe talked about in her testimony, like she was exposed to things online because she had a phone, she was online all the time, and this is the ideology that's being pushed on children on Instagram, on Snapchat, and in schools. And so make sure that you're raising your children and you're not letting social media or the government or schools raise your children.
Absolutely, yep.
So a very weighty story, but again, it gives personality to this movement and to this uprising because it's easy to think, wow, these things are impacting children, and that's really sad. But it's another thing to think, wow, this is one person's story. Again, she's the canary in the coal mine, and we need to rally around her and make sure this never happens because one child is too many.
Absolutely.
So speaking of which, we need your help in a lot of ways. One way Moses is going to be talking about, we need you to use your voice, of course, with petitions, but there's another way that you can help specifically this month.
Yeah, so as we approach the end of the year, we have had generous donors who have put up a matching challenge. So that means when you contribute to Minnesota Family Council and Institute through December 31, your donation will be doubled up to $40,000. And so this is a huge opportunity to if you make a contribution, for that contribution to be doubled, and that's awesome. But also even better than that, and this is, I believe, the first time we've done this since I've been here, at least. If you're a new donor, maybe you found Minnesota Family Council's work through this podcast, and you're interested in supporting the work that we do. If you're a new donor, your gift is actually going to be tripled, which is just
Wow.
so cool. And we're so grateful for the generosity of the donor family
That is amazing.
who's making this possible, and we're so grateful for the support that so many people have already showed. We have Giving Tuesday coming up on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, and then we also have into the end of the year is our biggest season for fundraising as people make year-end contributions, and we really hope you'll consider being one of those, because in 2023 we'll be fighting for life, family, and religious freedom. We'll be doing that at the state capitol in St. Paul in our new office, which will be just a few steps from the state capitol, as well as in the court system through True North Legal, in churches through the Church Ambassador Network, and in schools and in homes through the Parent Resource Guide and all the other resources that we have come up with that are available. We will continue to be the voice of Christians, people of faith, who want to stand up for life, family, and religious freedom in Minnesota, and we hope that you will consider that worthy of your support as you think about your giving, your family's charitable giving at the end of this year. So now, as we close out this episode, Grace, I'm wondering what you have been reading.
What a great question. I have to be honest with you. I have been kind of in a lull with my reading. I am reading stuff, but I don't know. Usually I'm like turning those pages, and I think part of it has to do with the fact that this is the end of the semester is drawing near, if you know what I mean, and we have all those big papers. And so I've been doing a lot of reading for school, but leisure-wise, I'm reading Robert Galbraith's The Silkworm. I didn't love the first book.
Oh, okay.
But I'm reading the second one.
You did go to the second one.
I am believing you. I'm trusting in you. I hope you will not lead me astray. You told me that it was better than the first. So far, I'm just a little bit in. I think part of it, though, may be the fact that I just don't know if I love that kind of genre. Like, I think I've just been realizing I just don't, because like Dorothy Sayers, kind of similar, like mystery. I don't know. It's okay, but and I know that's probably very unpopular, because I love Dorothy Sayers' essays.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
or
some
Agatha
people don't
Christie.
like mysteries. That's fine.
Agatha Christie's good, but I have not read all of her books. I've read a few, and I think they're fine.
Yeah, well, there's like 80 of her books.
Right. I know some people that love them so much, and I'm just like, I don't know. It's like, it's good, but it's not great. Yeah. So I think maybe I just don't like the detective mystery vibes as much. Maybe that's just it.
Fair enough.
I'm reading that, and then I'm rereading Even Exile, which is really good. The third time.
Wow.
Very, very good.
Dang.
Yeah. How about you?
I am still working on The Ink Black Heart by Robert Galbraith / J.K. Rowling. How is it? I have to say it's okay.
Okay.
I'm a little bit disappointed. I think it's going to get better, so I'm not going to vent my frustrations right now.
Okay.
And then I just finished Stalin's War, which I already talked about. Just how Stalin played Churchill and Roosevelt against each other and got everything he wanted out of World War II, even at the cost of millions of his own people. But that's not the sort of thing that a communist dictator cares about. So, just how not only did Stalin instigate the war, but he was, the author argues, really the main winner of the war. So it's an interesting take. There are some things I agreed with, some things I disagreed with. One thing I watched that I thought was interesting, or maybe two things I watched. I'm watching the latest season of The Crown.
Oh, I was going to ask if you've been watching that.
Yeah.
Do you like it?
Have you been?
No, I haven't started it yet. I actually haven't finished the 4th season.
Okay.
I got a little, I don't know. It just kind of felt like it was dragging on.
Well,
you know what I mean?
The 5th season is incredibly boring in one sense.
Is it?
It absolutely is. Like,
Diana's still with what's his name, the prince that's not good, but then they end up divorcing in that season, right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
So, let me just give you an example of how slow things are moving in this season. So we're on the 8th of 9 episodes, and they're just now divorcing.
Oh.
And there's this moment of when the notary or whatever puts the stamp on their divorce, and it's like she takes out the paper, she lays it down, she's thinking about it, and then in slow motion, she stamps it. And I'm just like, my time is precious. And I'm sitting here watching a slow motion divorce stamp.
I'm dead. Okay, I kind of felt that way with Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power.
Oh, yeah.
With, Galadriel. There's just, me and my sister were talking about it. There's just so much staring in those episodes. It was just like...
Right.
And it's like, okay, can we get rid of all the staring and we would have half as long of an episode?
Yeah, no,
I don't know.
Totally. These huge budgets and like
I don't know if I can get into The Crown again. I loved the first season.
Yeah.
I did like the introduction of Diana, but it just I wish there was like more romance in it, which is kind of funny because I'm not really a romance girl, but I just feel like the marriages are so not good that it makes me not want to watch it because I'm like, oh, this is what marriage is like, and I'm like, this makes me not like it.
That's kind of the secret, is that like people think this guy's trying to make the royal family look so good, but actually he's a Republican in the British sense, meaning that he doesn't believe in the monarchy. So he's not their friend.
Right.
And
right, I get that.
Yeah. So I enjoy the show just because I'm such an Anglophile, and the performances are really good.
Have
and
you
I
seen
would
Victoria?
say no, the young Victoria or just Victoria?
Victoria.
No, is that new?
Oh, it's good. It's like fairly new. I mean, like probably last 5 years.
Interesting.
It's on Amazon Prime, and it's actually really good. It's with what's that girl who plays Clara in Doctor Who, or Clara? One of the. Okay, anyways, she's really good. It's I think that's even better than The Crown, and it's only one season or two, so it's. And the dresses, I mean, it's Victorian England, so...
That is my favorite time period.
We're just nerding out over history, guys.
Okay, but I'll tell you one more thing that I watched that I thought was really interesting. It was a debate between Michel Foucault and Noam Chomsky.
No way. Okay, how was it?
From 1971, I think. It was really interesting. Just the first part. It was...
You should explain who they are for our people, because...
Yeah, so Michel Foucault is a French philosopher, long dead, and
didn't he love Freud?
I wish I knew more about him. He was after Freud. Michel Foucault was definitely one of the people who came up with, or who not came up with, but who inspired. I think he actually did come up with the whole idea of gender as being this category for humans rather than just words.
Because I read something by him last year, and I should really know. I should remember, but
yeah, I really need to know. I really need to learn more about him.
Oh, he's a deconstructionist. That's how I know. Yes. Because I read a paper on that. Yep.
So the really interesting thing was he was debating Noam Chomsky, who's this famous American socialist, or he calls himself a anarcho-syndicalist or something. He's still alive, and. Basically, they end up disagreeing about justice because basically, as a deconstructionist,
he's a utilitarian.
Foucault is basically saying justice is inseparable from the class system. I think if we have a class system, we will not speak of justice. And Noam Chomsky is like, he thinks we won't have justice, like it won't exist, which is, I think,
that is
total BS.
Right, of course it is, but it's just weird because I feel like he'd be more of a utilitarian. I don't know though.
I'm gonna plead ignorance about that philosophical category, but I think it's just interesting the distinction between Noam Chomsky, who's is American and as much of a socialist and everything as he is, he believes in this idea of justice. For him, socialism is about finding justice, but for Foucault, there's no such thing as justice, which really leaves ultimately power. And he pretty much says that, in a kind of a nice way.
But it's like, how do you have power? Is he just saying that anything you do is good because there's no justice? Or, I don't know, I'm kind of confused.
Well, it's very odd because basically they said, they disagreed. Like, Chomsky said, well, yeah, we can't really know what human nature is, but somehow we can know what certain human qualities are so that we can know that justice somehow derives from qualities of human nature.
Dude, I'm just so glad we're Christians. Like, whenever there are debates like that, I'm just like, wow, praise the Lord. Like, I'm a Christian, and
I hate to be a snob, but it's kind of like being in, it's kind of like looking down into Plato's cave, like it's not like I'm smarter than those people. I never will be smarter than those
but we
people.
Sure have a lot more hope and a lot more joy.
Exactly. But yeah, our hope is built on someone else. Our standards, our wisdom, our standards for justice, our standards for morality, for love, what things are real.
And the point of life, like, we live joyfully because of Christ.
Yeah.
Which, isn't that so cool to think about, though?
Yeah.
I think about it so much. Like, if you weren't a Christian, if I was not a Christian, I would not have hope for this world. I don't even know why I'd strive for anything. Like, I'm a very ambitious person, but I think if I wasn't a Christian, there'd be no point in just doing it all for myself and then just dying. I mean, I know some people are like, oh, just like live it up on earth because there's nothing afterwards. But for me, that's not appealing. Like, I have no desire to build anything if it doesn't go anywhere ultimately.
Right.
which of course this world is fleeting, but like it's all for the sake of the kingdom. Everything I do.
Right.
So
we do believe, and I think this is the only ultimate way of finding meaning, that the things we are doing in this earth now, when there is no hope for our worldly endeavors, and when worldly things offer us no hope, Christ Jesus offers us hope.
Yeah.
And that hope is eternal. It transcends death because Jesus Christ died on the cross and rose from the dead, beating death with a club, so
Let's
that we do
go.
not have to suffer in the same way, and we can live with him forever. So we do have ultimate hope. What an awesome note to end the episode on. We don't do that often enough.
Yeah, isn't it so cool that we work for an organization that lets us talk about these things? Like,
Yes,
that's amazing.
absolutely.
We're distinctly Christian. So if you want to hear more about politics from a Christian perspective and culture, make sure you tune in every single Friday. We always release a new podcast episode. Again, we always touch on life, family, and religious freedom, bringing you the top stories so you can get the facts and stand for truth. We will see you next week. Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you're up to date on life, family, and religious freedom. You can follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council and subscribe to us on YouTube to watch our content. Get the facts, stand for truth.